Welcome to the Widowed Parent Podcast with your host, Jenny Lisk.
Hey everyone, it's Jenny Lisk, and this is episode 7 of the Widowed Parent Podcast. I had such an interesting discussion with Austin Shoecraft for this episode. It's really such a privilege to talk to young adults who lost a parent when they were a kid, and talking with Austin really got me thinking about a lot of things, including about my own kids and how to best help them. Austin lost his dad when he was just 11. He talked about growing up with his dad, who was sick for as long as he could remember, and how hard it was not to have a lot of other strong memories since he had been so young. He also talked about his experiences with his peers, including how he changed schools. And now, as a 26-year-old, he has been attending a grief gathering of young adults called the Dinner Party. And he talked both about how that has helped him and also shared some reflections by the group in response to some questions that I had posed to them ahead of time. I hope you enjoy my discussion with Austin Shoecraft. My guest today is Austin Shoecraft, who is joining us from his home in New York City. Austin, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really glad to be talking with you today. And I should say for our listeners that if Austin's name sounds a little bit familiar, it's because I interviewed his sister, Kellen Shoecraft, in episode 2 of the podcast about her experience and tips around making board books for young kids. And Kellen was 20 when her dad died, and she suggested that I also speak with her younger brother, who was just 11 at that time. So I'm excited to be speaking with you today, Austin. And I think that hearing from people who are now adults, who lost a parent when they were a child or a teenager, is a really helpful perspective for people like me, for widowed parents. It's not like your experience is going to tell me exactly what my kids are going to go through. But I think that hearing from a variety of people who've traveled this path and can share their reflections will help me as a parent understand my kids' experience a little better. Gives me a variety of ideas, things to look out for, topics, potentially what to anticipate over the years. So thank you for being here today.
Hey, happy to join.
All right, cool. Let's back up for listeners a little bit. Let's set the stage here. If you could maybe tell me a little bit about your life before your dad died. How old were you? Where were you living? What were you doing? What was life like before your loss?
Sure. So I was in North Salem, New York, which for anyone who knows where that is, I'd be surprised. It's in Upper Westchester.
I know what it is. I used to live in Westchester County.
Yeah. So even in Westchester, it's still quite up there. So we moved when I was maybe 7 or 8 from Bedford Hills. So I was with my father in both those houses. And growing up, my dad was always sick. So he had like a kidney or liver transplant. I always forget which. Which, funny enough, I forget these crucial details. But he was sick my entire life. And so I always had that experience of him just not being able to do normal dad things. But we moved up there, and it kind of we were always isolated, kind of separated, type of, it's just like lots of property kind of, and so growing up, so I was 11 when my dad passed, and I grew up with him always being sick. So it was kind of always a knowledge of like just life was different. It wasn't a normal, or I guess normal childhood where like you got your parents, you can do sports, you can like be with them, do hikes and whatever. My dad could barely walk lots of the time. So like my memories of him are running to go grab his insulin from the refrigerator or sitting and watching movies with him. More sedentary things. So I think about like the last couple years of his life, like, well, one, I don't have that many true memories anymore. A lot of it is, so I think like I was 11. I kind of think about how like you can only form memories really after you're 3. So it's like 8 years. And those are like, now it's been so many more years of me without him than me with him, that things have kind of just, I've lost a lot. So I try to, I mostly remember those last few years of him being really sick, him going into the hospital, me watching him, having to call the ambulance a couple of times near the end to take him to the hospital. Those are unfortunately the things that I have to remember. So when you lose, like when I grew up losing someone so young, I don't maintain like a lot of those things. I guess those memories more of him. But I still had a very good and happy childhood. So like it wasn't sad really at all. I didn't have a real care in the world besides that. And my dad was still very involved in my life. He would come to my games, like of when I played hockey or soccer. So there was still like there was a balance, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. And you mentioned that you've lived longer now without him than you did with him. And I think you said when we were talking earlier, it's been about 15 years since he passed away. Yeah.
So it's been, I'm 26 now. And so 15 years have passed. It'll be the 16th anniversary coming up in February. And so like, and even of my like you don't have all that many memories of before you're 11, at least like strong, like you might have like individual moments, but I don't have like long, like, and even like it's kid thoughts or kid memory. So it doesn't feel that strong anymore. It's more of the idea of him rather than like true, like hard memories. Like I look to some of the things my sister writes on her blog about, like, she'll write about my dad and like memories she has, and I'm like, I don't remember any of those things. And it feels like I've missed a lot of him.
Okay. And she's about 9 years older than you are?
She's 9 years older.
Okay.
Yeah, so she grew up like all of her teenage years with him, and you got to experience a lot more. So I definitely have a lot less of those strong memories to keep me, like, I guess, through later in life. Yeah, that's an interesting point. The difference in experience with being such different ages. It's something that I've thought about too, and heard people talk about in relation to, like for example, in my case and my kid's case, we all lost the same person, the same person named Dennis, but I lost my husband and they lost their father. So it's a totally different experience of the same loss. Yeah. And I've wondered about who's whenever you compare who has lost more. It's always like just a ridiculous question. But like I compare against my sister and against my mom of like who has taken it worse, who's lost the most. And it's just, I mean, it's a stupid question, but it's definitely something you think about. And I feel like I've had an easier time, but it's so subjective, and that it also comes down to the individual. So there's like, I feel like I missed out on more, but it may have like been like less painful.
Interesting. Do you think that's based on your age or based on other factors?
I think part age, but I was also, I don't know if it comes down to, I was an extremely independent child. So I think I partly learned to just kind of self-contain myself, and that's something I'm kind of exploring on my, like now on my own, to try to like open myself up more. So I definitely, if I'm going through anything hard, I go into myself very deeply. I don't open up at all. I kind of shut in, and that's a coping mechanism I believe I found when I was younger. I was kind of isolated. My mom was very busy with my dad being sick. My sisters were much older in a way, and it's kind of I went insulated or insular.
Okay, thank you. So then your life changed, and so you've touched on this a little bit. Then so he died when you were 11, and so like did something change right away? Did your like what? In addition to losing your dad, like, did any other major things change in your life in the near term?
So I lost him in the middle of my 6th grade year, and then for my next school year, I changed schools because my mom felt the school didn't do very well in me handling my dad's loss. I remember I missed a week of school and went back, and I remember the school hadn't told my teachers. So one of my teachers yelled at me for missing so much school, and that I'm going to have to catch back up. She apologized profusely, like later. I mean, I I did tell her when she found out. She was so extremely upset. She's like, we will handle everything.
Right.
But like they didn't even bother telling them. Like my mom had told them, I believe like the day it happened or the next day to say I'd be missing school, and there was no guidance or helpful part on their part.
That's terrible.
Yeah,
that must have been
I remember
awful
just being
for
like
you.
stunned.
Yeah, you go back in the classroom and you're already traumatized, and your teacher's yelling at you.
Yeah, so I just didn't even know how to like handle that scenario. I just like went quiet and just like, okay.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and you were so young, right? I mean,
Yeah.
How would you know how?
Exactly. How am I supposed to know how to handle this?
Yeah. Wow. So okay. So then, so I'm interested in that topic of school and peers and kids and how. I mean, in addition to that, then this how it was handled in the immediate first couple of weeks here. Like what? How else?
I mean, I know. I kind of have a memory. I definitely acted out a lot. I think I used a lot of my like internal sadness. I don't remember. I remember with fears. I got in a couple fights, like minor fights, but like just incidents that like I had never gotten in before. So, I mean, I definitely was acting out in some way, and everything definitely wasn't all right and like happy.
Yeah. Do you
like
think that the school, was handled that well, or didn't handle that well, or?
No, I don't remember it like ever coming up like, oh, he's acting up maybe because his boss's dad. It was just like, oh, this is just a kid acting out. Like, oh, he's getting in fights. I remember I got in a fight with someone like much bigger than me, and like we were both like, I remember I getting like punched, like what we call sucker punch, where you're not paying attention. It's completely like, and like I got like fully in trouble, same as him, and like I was on the floor being kicked, and like it never came up like that. Maybe let's try to uncover the reason this is happening. It's just like this is another kid's fighting. Let's handle it.
Okay.
It wasn't. There was no attempt to dig deeper.
Gotcha. Okay.
At least from my point of view.
Sure. Yeah. And so did changing schools then, was that helpful, or?
It was definitely helpful. It was a much smaller school. I was a private school, but I definitely felt out of place socially. These are kids who went to school like for X number of years altogether, and I was the new kid. So I definitely didn't feel, and like I was known coming in as like people find out like, oh, that you've lost a parent just like through asking, through conversation over like the next like year or two, and I don't think I ever got like what kids like that age don't really understand unless like it's happened right then. Well, to them, but like unless it's happened like right then, like your peer has lost their parent, like they get the sadness. I remember one of my classmates lost his dad and then his mom a year later, and like the entire school was supportive and it was really great. And I just remember being slightly bitter that I'm like, well, this never happened to me.
Yeah.
And it feels so like bad to be like, I'm bitter if someone else gets more attention, more compassion during their loss. But that was just like a natural, I think, reaction of.
Yeah, and this was at the new school.
At the new school, yeah.
Okay, I wonder if it's by the time you came into the new school, the loss was in your past, and so maybe they just I don't know,
it was already like. It had already happened. It was 7 months or so. So like it wasn't a then issue. It didn't come up. And I'm sure the high majority of people didn't know, like teachers, and maybe like they come about like, oh, the last like for like Father's Day or something, like however like teachers find out, be like, and you have to explain, but that's not like it happened right then and they know you're grieving now. They kind of assume it's in the past, so maybe it's handled.
Do you feel like you got kind of like marked as like, oh, that's the kid whose dad died? Like,
I don't think so. I don't think that would have been. I think people know, but I don't think kids think about that kind of stuff. For the most part. So I don't think anyone like treated me differently. I think maybe like if they were mentioning like a dad, they might like have to rethink about it. I'd be like, oh right. So it wasn't like an immediate thought.
Oh, like if they said, oh, can your dad pick you up from baseball or something? And then they'd be like, oh, oops. Yeah,
exactly.
Okay.
So it's just like how it's like everyone thinks about themselves most of all. It's like, no one's thinking about like me and I'm not thinking about them. It's like, that's just how it is.
So is that like, I mean, if somebody it's almost like they put their foot in their mouth or something, I guess. I mean, was that like, I guess some kids would find that really hard to deal with, and other kids would be like, whatever, brush it off.
Yeah. So I've been talking to a lot of people who have lost their parent at a young age, and it seems some people handle it like very defiantly. Some people try not to talk about it at all. So they'll go years. They'll try to see like how long they can go without their friends knowing, like their best friends.
Oh.
Like when they meet someone new in like high school or college.
Okay.
And some people are just very outright and just like kind of more in your face about it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like everyone handles it a little bit or a lot differently. So it can depend on I think the kid of how they're going to choose or how they kind of cope. Are they going to act like their world's fine, everything's good? Yes, my dad died or my mom died, but that's whatever. Or are they just gonna, like, I have a friend who she'll just be like, she almost like does it. She does it a lot less now, but she used to like kind of just like throw it in people's faces and just see how they reacted.
Okay. Yeah.
Just like she did to see what reaction they got, and that was kind of the game.
Okay. One thing I've been thinking about. I've heard and read that they say that one thing that's different about like children's grief versus adults' grief is that kids end up having to re-grieve that loss as they move through their different developmental milestones. Is that something that you've noticed, or what do you think about that?
Oh, definitely. Like it comes in waves as I hit different points where I wish I had my dad, and like because you hit these like. I mean, everyone has like these life moments, and so like the typical is like, oh, I wish my dad could walk me down the aisle, or like and like big things. But it would just come like, I wish my dad could teach me how to drive instead of my uncle.
Okay.
I wish I could have my dad to talk to for all of my life, like anything going crazy. Through college, I think he would have like set me on a much clearer path. So it's like everything. I mean, yeah, it's like more like you have to figure out on your own, but it's like you know that there's whole voice and like guiding light that you just have taken away from you. It's like I've told people it's like there's a tree of possibilities, and just like you just pruned off a whole bunch of branches. Like that part of your life is not even a chance anymore.
Interesting.
And you just have to figure out your own path through what you have left.
Gotcha.
You just don't have that influence anymore.
Okay. Gotcha. Yeah, no, that makes sense. And you mentioned something interesting about maybe you'd call them like unexpected gotchas, right? Like as you said, everybody knows about, okay, walking down the aisle, your wedding or graduation, you're going to miss that person that you lost. And then you mentioned some things like learning to drive that maybe people wouldn't think of. Are there other things like that you noticed that, kind of gotchas that maybe widowed parents might be like, oh gosh, I wasn't expecting, I don't know, 4th of July to be hard or whatever,
I mean, there's so many things that like the kid could have an attachment. Like my dad was really into cars, so that's definitely something I gravitated towards, and something I wish I had an experience with him, because at 11, there's only like so much of an interest in cars I can possibly have.
Yeah.
That's more something that you can do when you can work on cars and drive cars. So that's something I really attach to. But then like, I mean, for a guy, I don't know for a guy, but like drinking beer, or like when you can start drinking alcohol, it's just like a small one.
That's an interesting, maybe you imagine going out for a beer with your dad or going to the ball game. And
yeah, just like none of those instances could happen. And like my dad, I remember he gave me a sip of beer and I absolutely hated it. But like but like little things always will remind you of them. Playing billiards is something I did with my dad a lot, and that's something I always will feel kind of a connection to, or a little. If I think about sadness, because that's something I like to do too. So I think kids develop these like attachments, and like you'll naturally feel like these waves. You'll always just feel sad at certain points. Sometimes you don't know why, and it'll take you a few days to figure it out. You might not even figure it out. It may be years later, like, oh, that's why I was a pain. I was grieving. I was sad then. More than usual. It doesn't. Yeah, like it never. for anyone grieving, it never just gets, it gets slightly easier, but there's always times you dip back down and just are very sad. It always just comes.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you. Was there a turning point for you? Like, was there a point at which you knew, like, all right, I'm gonna be okay, or, you know, okay, this still sucks. Now I have a new normal, or, you know, any kind of turning point like that you can identify?
I don't know if I can identify like a specific like moment. I can just look. I can look back and see, like, I kind of group my life into like middle school, so like my new school, and then like I went to a different high school, so my new high school, and then like college, and like I can see myself progressively getting like more open, more happy as these shifts went on. As you change the environments, I think I just moved to, one that's growing up, like, who really likes middle school and high school. But I think I just got more easy and more like relaxed and less, I definitely fell into like binders of sadness, and I think that happened less and less as I grew up and moved. I think it's just you growing up, and those typical things that like kids get more confident with themselves as they grow up. I think that's the same progression, but like there's this just like overarching or overhanging grief that's just there, and like that just while I'm growing up dealing with all these things, I'm also learning to handle this grief, right? Like along the same time.
Yeah. So what do you think you learned by? I mean, most people don't have to experience grief, you know, at such a young age. At most, they might lose a pet or a grandparent who's elderly or something. What do you think you learned by having to face grief at such a young age?
Definitely that things could be worse. Like no matter what's like bad, like I can never say this is the worst day of my life. After my dad died, up until like nowish, I couldn't. There wasn't anything more. Like like there's nothing bad. I mean, it may have ruined like consequences for a lot of things, but like I knew there was never going to be a worse day. Pretty much, like I could be like, well, that my mom could die. Oh, that would be bad. And like that could but like unless it was something extreme, nothing was that awful. Like a regular kind of awful thing wasn't really that awful in perspective. Yeah, like I did bad on a test. Like who cares? And that was probably definitely bad for my schoolwork. But that was definitely something I've grown accustomed to. Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I'm also curious, what's your reaction to this conventional wisdom? I think you often hear this idea that kids are resilient. What's your reaction to that? I mean, you're not just going to stop living. So it's like, of course, kids are resilient. They're going to keep going. But it's going to, I think a lot of it's not going to hit them until they're older, until they stop moving into their 20s and 30s. And older, that I think it's just delayed, a lot of it. They can't process so much of what just happened. They can barely understand death at 11 to then understand what the future is going to be like. So I think kids are just kind of like a delayed sadness that like it's just going to keep going, and it's going to, if you don't tackle it and handle it well, it can really come out later in life. And I think it's a cause for a lot of problems. Okay. Yeah, that's interesting, because I when I hear that kids are resilient, I feel kind of two ways about it, right? Like you're saying, like on the one hand, yes, but on the other hand, maybe not always, or maybe not everyone, or it's kind of that's an interesting one. It's like when you hear, "Oh, you're so strong." It's like, well, what's the alternative? Yeah. You just want me to break down all the time, not show up? Like I'm. Yeah. You eventually, or a lot of people figure you just need to keep going, and maybe that might make things easier. It's like, I don't know, I'm strong for some circumstances. Like it's not. I didn't build up for this. I didn't want this. It's not. I don't know. I think it's a bad phrase. Yeah. No, that's a really good point. I hear that one a lot too. Yep. Okay, so I suppose you've probably gotten some advice over the years from various parts. I'm wondering if either the best advice you ever got or the worst advice you ever got, or any kind of conventional wisdom that you think is
true or not true around this whole topic?
I don't know if I can pinpoint like a quote but like just a general belief in yourself, and that like, I don't like to say just purely working hard, because I like to add working smart, but like that kind of, like, you can really, like, you will only help yourself so much if you choose to like help yourself and work on what you're trying to do. So like, you can't just like will yourself out of depression, but you can take steps to make life easier for yourself. There's definitely times when I got really sad and just wanted to and like do nothing but play video games, and I did that for a long time, and that did not help me in any real way, except being good at video games. I didn't get any happier. I didn't socialize, and that's, I think, stunted a lot of me. So it was learning that I can just take those small steps, be more social, try and be happy, like put yourself out there to have those experiences, and it will pay dividends.
Okay. And you mentioned when we were talking that you've been attending something called the dinner party. I'm wondering if, well, first of all, could you tell listeners maybe a little bit about what is the dinner party?
Yeah, so the dinner party was something my sister actually pointed me towards. It's for people in their 20s or 30s, at least started for, to come together over like a potluck style dinner and talk about their experiences with grief. So it's for people who lost someone in their life. My group just so happened to be for people who lost a parent, like pretty much below their 20s. So in their growing adolescent years. So we have people who never met never were 2 or 3. A lot of people were 3. Certainly, and then many in like the 11, 12, and then like the 18 kind of chunks. So I just get to learn and kind of share like our experiences. It definitely was slightly different for me in that group because I lost my sister a little over a year ago. So that was definitely the grief I was most focused on handling. But being exposed to that environment really helped me, opened me up. I think made it easier to handle it. And I'm learning so much about other people's experiences, and there's a lot shared. No matter how it happened, there's a lot of shared experiences between us all. Yeah. So it's not something that you're going through alone. Like, there's always other people with in this case dead parents or siblings or whatever. Like, there's people all over the world sharing, and it's community to help kind of go through it. Yeah. No, that's really cool. I wonder, is this group kind of the first time you've connected with peers who've had similar losses, or like when you were younger, were you in like a grief group or any kind of formal or informal? This is my first as a group, definitely. Sometimes I had met like others who had, I don't remember, you don't talk about it much. And like I went to therapy, and that definitely helped a lot. But it's different when it's peers at the same like rough age range and like same like similar experiences. That like you're just able to connect very easily. Like it's amazing how like strangers are able to have like in-depth conversations, very personal conversations so quickly. Yeah. When it's like so primed for it. Right. No, that's cool. And I'll ask the question that may be on the mind of some listeners. Is it just a big crying fest, or do you guys have a good time? Like, what's it like? No, I mean, it's definitely a good time. It's not a big cry fest. Like, you'll have like one person maybe like ever when they get to it, like when they get into something. But a lot of laughing, a lot of jokes. But like, and sometimes really dark, morbid conversations. Like, it's very just like, I like to call it the death dinner. So I'm just like very blunt with with my like delivery of what it is and what I'm doing. And it's like there's no need to dance around like the subject. Like, it's like you come in, it's like everyone's lost someone. In this case, it's everyone's lost a parent. Right. There's nothing you don't need to tiptoe around the issue like you do with pretty much everyone else. You could just be direct and be like, this is when it's happened.
I'm guessing that must feel really good for that couple hours while you're
Exactly. Like it's very draining. Like you don't come away, I normally don't come away like liberated. And I've heard people like say like they come away like in like a little depression for a couple days.
Interesting.
Just like you pull out so much. It's a lot of emotions. Like you might not be crying then, but maybe you'll cry the next day, or you'll just feel sad for a couple days. But I think it definitely makes you feel better in the long run. So it's like whenever you try to pull out those like sad thoughts instead of just like pushing them down, like you feel sad, like you're pulling them out or letting them come up, and you'll feel sad. You might feel sad for a little bit, but it generally makes you feel happier or more relaxed in the long run.
It sounds like in the grand scheme of things, you keep going back, so I guess you're finding it beneficial.
I'm not a masochist.
No, that's cool. All right, well, be sure and put in the show notes a link to the dinner party. And I have read that they do have dinners. I mean, I know you're in New York City, but all over the country.
Oh yeah, everywhere. And and if there wasn't one in a city, you can just start one. You could you could be a host.
Awesome.
So there's always at least in New York City, there's a waiting list for people who want to get on. So they're happy to accept more people.
Okay. But, no, that's really cool. I think that's a great resource, because I'm thinking, even though this discussion is focused on widowed parents, and the parents themselves might be older than that group and their kids are younger than that group, if there's some teenagers in the bunch, in a few years down the road, it might be a great resource for them.
Yeah, definitely. And there, like that might be a good resource for the future, and maybe something similar could be a great resource for now. Like if you have a teenage kid, like it might be hard to get them to go, but it might be helpful if they're willing.
Okay, no, that's really cool. And you had given me a heads up that you were going to this, and asked if there were any questions that that maybe you could ask on behalf of this audience. So I'm wondering, how did that go? Did you guys get into a discussion around this topic? Anything that would be interesting?
Yeah, we definitely chatted around it. Like one of the questions you asked me was like, what do they learn by facing grief at such a young age? And a lot of people were like, how much you do have to grow up. Like you kind of lose partly being a child for some, and that's continued on like for now. So some people are having to take care of their parents who aren't like they're in their 50s or 60s, but they're not like they're kind of stuck, and they have to help their parents like kind of live, like stopping by, making sure they're not like they're taking their meds and leaving the house and all this stuff. So it's like the roles have reversed, that they became so self-reliant, and their parents kind of never were able to become so self-sufficient, or never regained that the roles have kind of swapped.
Interesting. And most people don't have to face that with their own aging parents until they're much older.
Yeah.
Not in their 20s and 30s, but maybe some later.
Exactly. So like I hear stories, and I feel so sorry that like they're still grieving. Like they're coming to these dinner parties, they're still grieving, and then they have all these parental issues of like making sure their parents can take their meds and not drink, and kind of take control of their lives, and they're upset that I need to live my life too. I lost out so much when I was a kid that I need to now take control and do my own thing, and it's hard. And they're like, I don't want to lose another parent, but I need to live my life too.
Okay, interesting. Okay, all right. Thank you for sharing that. What other parts of the conversation that you think would be interesting here?
So maybe some interesting things from those who've lost like their parents when they were like 3 was like, I mean, there's always like the general dynamic of like some parents like remarry and some don't, and like one person kind of feels sorry that like their mom never found someone else, and like so like she was fine with it, and it's something that her mom could be open to, but she's never talked with her mom about it, so she doesn't know like why it never happened. Like it's been over 20 years, and now she's also starting to think of, well, when my mom gets older, I'm an only child. I'm going to be the one to take care of my mom, and so it kind of so it's kind of seeing like it's kind of like a slight selfish mindset, but also like trying to pay attention, like making sure like your parent takes care of themselves so that you don't have to.
That's such an interesting point. Yeah.
And so it's hard because I think a lot of parents try not to date. Like, you definitely don't want to. I mean, it must be very hard to lose your significant other, your partner, like however long you've been, like, and how quickly you date, and that's something everyone's thinking about you, like, and then you don't know if your kids are going to accept, and that's just like I can't imagine a huge issue, and it's something that your kids are thinking about too, and it's just a massive hard thing to balance.
Do you have any experiences with that you can reflect on?
Yes. So I know the first like couple guys my mom dated, like I wasn't that receptive at all to them. Like, I knew she would. I remember like family members being like, "Oh, your mom, like, she might have to start dating, and are you okay with that?" I'm just like, "Why are you talking to me about this? Go away."
And how old were you? Like
12 or 13.
Like, yeah, and you're like, no.
Yeah. So like and then slowly, like, it depends on how, like, they won't replace your parent. You know that. But like part of it was I wanted to see my mom happy. So I was like happy when she finally met like a guy who was nice and helpful, and I definitely noticed a change in her mood, and she was much happier. So that was like a good thing. I know my sister didn't. She had a very difficult time accepting it. So that was something she eventually, I guess, learned to handle more. I don't know why. Maybe because I was still around, so I could see my mom like struggling, and like the kind of the feedback loop. If she was dating someone she liked, that she was happier and nicer, and not nicer, but just like happier in general. So I'm not sure if that was. Maybe that was it, or.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Close with my dad.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, because I think it's probably something on the minds of a lot of widowed parents. Anything else from the dinner party group? Other insights or?
This one. So it's kind of this theme of, and it's very. I'm obviously talking from like only my like as the child's standpoint. Like I'm not a parent yet, and I haven't lost a significant partner, so I don't know what this will be like. But the theme is like when you're a kid and one of your parents is lost, that the other parent really needs to step up, and it's so hard to like say that, and like especially to like to someone who's grieving, and to like parents who are like recently lost and like are going through so much. But when the parent struggles to start to take care of the life that's going on and their kids' lives, it builds a lot of resentment and a lot of hate, and it like never seems to mend. Or not never, but like it makes it so much harder, and there's so much rift and all this. It's like, it sucks when family doesn't work. It's not the thing you can lean back on. It's not a happy place. Like, even if there's sadness, it's good when the family can stay as a strong unit, and when that breaks down, it's sad and it hurts.
Yeah. Okay. I don't know what to say. That you're really making me think, so this is fantastic. I mean, I love talking to you about this because it's so, my kids are obviously much younger than you, and so having your insights on this as someone who's now in your 20s, it's just really helpful. And I hope listeners are finding the same. Let's see, what haven't we covered? Have you gotten involved in any kind of, and maybe you haven't, and that's okay, but like any, I don't know, volunteer work or anything, based on your experience, have you?
Nothing, not really. So kind of a small thing I've noticed. So in the dinner party, I am the only male I've ever met in the group, and there's been about 10 people, maybe 15 people who've shuffled through.
Okay.
And the only reason I went, one, is because my sister pointed out the group, and then two, the host of the group was one of my good friends' girlfriend's best friend. And she, like, we hadn't met, but, like, we kind of definitely knew about each other. And she messaged me directly, being like, "Oh, Austin, hi! Like, I saw you sign up for the dinner party." So, like, the only reason I went is because I was kind of
on the hook to
show up.
Right.
And, like, now I'm happy I did it. So I don't know how much of, like, male female things, like, I believe, but it definitely seems like a trend that women are much more open to these types of experiences. To at least, like, I think addressing you're handling your grief and handling, like, emotions. So maybe to, like, a parent, that's something to keep in mind, that, like, I was always someone to bury the emotions down, and, like, a lot of my people at the different also were, but they're more I think accepting of trying to address the issues later on, whereas I probably would have just kept kind of going on if I wasn't pushed to. So I think it's definitely an interesting little knowledge of, like, the difference between sexes.
Yeah. Well, and actually that's another reason why I'm excited to be talking to you today, because, you know, generally talking to people in this grief field, and, you know, people like, you know, widowed parents, and you know, so far I've talked to more women than to men, and, you know, and I think, like you said, women may oftentimes be more willing to talk about it, or so it's great to get, you know, your perspective and other men in here as guests, and hear from you guys.
It's definitely a shame, I guess. I mean, part of, like, our culture kind of suggests that men I feel like men shouldn't do this, or, like, macho culture, like, you shouldn't have emotions. And something I've heard I've seen from relatives, like they kind of, like, our male relatives definitely seem less receptive, or, like, expect, I think, more of, like, my immediate family, of, like, getting over grief, and, like, why can't they just carry on? And it definitely seems misguided. And
okay, so for those of us who have teenage boys, I mean, what, like, I don't know, do you have any advice on, you know?
It's I mean, just dealing with teenagers are going to be terrible to begin with. It's just being really open and trying to understand that they're not going to tell you everything, for the most part. Like, I definitely hid a lot of how I felt and was dealing with things. You're definitely going to say I'm fine. And just, I guess, giving them their space and trying to create avenues for them to open up if they can.
So looking back, do you wish you had been more open sooner, or do you think, you know, it went okay for you and you wouldn't change anything?
Yeah, I wish, like, I could have been more open, and more discussions happened. I mean, I don't know how much I've been receptive to a lot of these things, but I think the more you can be open, it's something I've kind of thought about, how, like, as I feel like for a lot of people, like, we don't have, like, a big community. For most people, like, they don't have, like, a big family community they can, like, are open and sharing with. Families are so distributed that for these types of big instances, that, like, I didn't have that much family near me. So, like, my family was pretty isolated. Like, it was just, for a while, it was just me and my mom in our house. And so it felt very lonely and sad. And I think when everyone goes through, when they go through grief, you know, there's, like, the month or two, or, like, that first year where people are kind of more talkative. They're reaching out to you on big events, and then that just slowly fades away. And those people who called 1 year after like, my dad died, I didn't hear from them for many years after. And people forget, and it's not malicious, but that type of support dies down so fast. So it's learning to handle that, and making sure that, like, if you are, let's say, like an uncle or an aunt, to reach out routinely, to at least try, because, like, I know I don't respond a lot, like, immediately. My sister writes about this, like, just because, like, I don't respond doesn't mean, like, I don't appreciate it. I just wasn't maybe ready to make that response back.
A response, like, if somebody texts you, or
yeah, like, I'll receive a text, especially, like, after my sister died. Like, I received plenty of texts, and I would, like, look at it and smile a little, and just let it go. I'm definitely not as quick to respond to a lot of these things. But it's not like it's hard to be on the other end of like sending out text messages and not receiving anything back. But it's definitely appreciated.
Okay. So even though you didn't respond, maybe you didn't have the energy to get into a back and forth with somebody or whatever, but
exactly.
You appreciated receiving it. You're glad they sent it, and hopefully somehow they know that and don't get dissuaded from contacting you again.
Yeah.
You mentioned being an uncle. So Kellen and I talked about the books that she's made for her nephew, your nephew.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything, do you think, like that you're doing as an uncle with your nephew, maybe based on your own experience, or how's your experience informing your relationship with him?
I find our relationship very good. I mean, he's very shy, so those first
he's little, right? He's like 3?
Yeah, he's 3.
Okay.
So it's still, he's very young, but there's like a lot I want to do for him. I definitely want to be a big part of his life, and a big thing for me is if I want to, I think about where I do I want to leave the city? Do I want to live in another country? And it's a hard thought because I don't ever want to be that far away from him, and I don't want to be far away from my niece either. I want to be a part of their lives so I can help provide that structure and be that uncle. So I mean that's kind of a hard thing. It's I want to live my life too, but I also definitely want to be there for them as much as I can.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that makes sense. What haven't we talked about? What's on your mind that maybe we've missed? I
don't know.
And that's okay if
yeah. I don't know. I don't have that the list of questions, so I've kind of just been going off.
Yeah. No, this has been great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, because we are reaching the end of our time today, so just one last question, actually. If you could say one thing to adults who might have a grieving child in their life, what would you say to them?
To really not try to give up hope for them. One, they can have a really great life. Things will get easier, but to try not to don't stop being a parent to them. You really need to be the parent in their lives still, because now you have to be both parents really. So you have to put in that much extra work, and it's hard being on the knowledge of being the child, knowing that can't imagine what a parent also is going through, but knowing that it's kind of the idea that if you chose to have a child, you need to step up and be that parent. And even though you must be going through absolute hell, grieving, and with the whole world maybe crashing down, that you still need to provide that structure and be that parent for that kid, because otherwise it's just going to affect your relationship going forward.
Okay, thank you so much. I think that's a great place to end.
Yeah, a real heavy note to hit on.
No. Well, so my guest today is Austin Shoecraft, who lost his dad when he was just 11 years old. And Austin, thank you so much for speaking with me today.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
It's been a lot of fun.
It's been great.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Austin Shoecraft as much as I did. You can find show notes and all the links at widowedparentpodcast.com and look for episode 7. And by the way, if you've been widowed by cancer, you may be interested in the Take Action Against Cancer Day of Service that I'm organizing for February 4th, which is World Cancer Day. It's a way for families to turn their grief into action by helping in the fight against cancer, and it's one of the efforts being highlighted by the Biden Cancer Initiative from the Cancer Summit that they held this past fall. I've found in my family that turning our grief into action to make a difference for others actually helps us with our grief too. Head on over to takeactionagainstcancer.org for more information and to get involved. And of course, I'm always taking your questions for future shows. At widowedparentpodcast.com, you can write in with what is your biggest challenge as a widowed parent. This helps me to bring you guests and topics that are interesting to widowed parents, whether they're moms or dads, whether their loss is recent or not so recent, and for various ages of kids. If there's something you really want to know, just ask. I've gotten a lot of fantastic questions that have helped me broaden the show's perspective, and I'm so grateful that so many of you have taken the time to write in. So hey, thanks for listening. Until next week, keep smiling.
Thank you for listening to the Widowed Parent Podcast with your host, Jenny Lisk. Connect with us on social media and at widowedparentpodcast.com.